In terms of test justification then, and why those tests were chosen for my client. So the yo-yo test. The yo-yo test is reliable because it has been repeated hundreds of times and has always been shown to have the same consistency and accuracy of measurement. However, it's not as much of a direct measure as something like gas analysis would be, but it is the most valid test I had available with the equipment I had available. The fact that the yo-yo test is a valid predictor of high intensity running ability means that the yo-yo test is also a good predictor between levels of play amongst rugby players. This also makes it very suitable for my client as he's constantly having to run at high intensities throughout the game. Particularly it's suitable as he needs aerobic endurance to continue for the whole game, the whole duration of the game. Finally, the yo-yo test is also very practical for me to set up. It only requires the recording, the cones, obviously the tape measure to set it out, and it can be done in the gym, the sports hall, along with all of the other tests, so it doesn't require any extra space or outdoor space, meaning that it can't be affected by the weather or anything. Secondly then, so the 30-metre sprint test. This wasn't the most reliable form of the test, but we didn't have light gates available, so that reliability couldn't be at its peak, as I had to ensure that it was practical for the environment and practical in terms of the equipment that I had available. So I couldn't get light gates to increase that reliability. But it was the most reliable test, aside from that setback, that I could use. The test is also very valid as it is literally a direct measure of speed because it's a covered distance in a certain time, so you can divide distance by time to get speed. Finally, speed is suitable to him as a rugby player because, like previously mentioned, aerobic endurance is needed to continue for the whole duration of the game. And like previously mentioned, the 30-metre sprint that I did was very practical as it requires a minimal amount of equipment, and all of the equipment that it did require was readily available. And the sports hall is over 30 metres long, meaning that it had runoff space as well, preventing any injury. So yeah, the test was very practical. The reason this test was actually very suitable to him as a rugby player as well, specifically to his position, is that speed is really needed as an outside centre. An outside centre has to beat the opposition for pace down the wing there. Although the name of the position, it would suggest that they are in the middle of the pitch, they actually have to play quite wide, meaning that they have to make darting runs down the wing to beat their player, which is why that speed is needed and why that test is very suitable as it directly measures that speed. The third test was the Illinois agility test. This is reliable as it's perhaps the agility test with the most normative data to support it. So it's got lots of evidence, lots of people have used this test and recorded their data for use of other people to collect and gather a kind of normative data and averages. The test is also valid as I tested 3 times and I can get an average from that, but also the results that I did get were all very close, meaning that there must have been high validity. In addition to this, there aren't actually many agility tests with thorough research and normative data behind it. So this test is the most valid as it does have that data and evidence to support it, and it is direct measure of the speed at which you can change those directions. In terms of his position and his sport, it's very suitable for a rugby player because agility is needed to weave in between and dodge the opposition to try and, obviously, you don't want to be tackled, so you have to make those dodges and weave between them to get past them and perhaps score a try. Finally, the test was very practical as it's easily set up in the sports hall. Only really requires a tape measure, cones, and a timer. All of that equipment was readily available, and it could be done inside, so again, weather wouldn't affect it either. The fourth test was the standing broad jump, which measured leg power. This test is reliable as it has, again, lots of normative data behind it, lots of supporting data allowing us to create averages that I can compare my client to. There's thorough research supporting it, suggesting that it is a reliable test. The test isn't as valid as gold standard tests as it doesn't directly measure power, because obviously the figure that you get at the end isn't measured in watts, of course. It is, however, the best test that I could do with the equipment I have available to me. It's also obviously valid in terms of it is directly measuring the power in the leg as opposed to any other areas. And it's measuring that kind of forwards push as opposed to a vertical jump, because you wouldn't be jumping vertically as such in rugby, whereas you would be driving forwards in rugby. Again, it's very practical as you only need a small space for it. My client, I believe, jumped around 2 meters, but yeah, you generally only need maximum of like 5 square meters to do the test, and that was readily available in the sports hall along with my other tests. Yeah, like I said, and it's very suitable as well because an outside centre, which is my client's position, they need power in their legs to drive forward. That might be sprinting to beat their player, like I previously mentioned, or even if they have to tackle someone, you need that kind of drive forwards and that power to take them down and tackle them to the ground. My fifth test was the hand grip dynamometer. This is reliable as it has large amounts of research and normative data to support it, much like a lot of the other tests. It's also very difficult for it to be measured wrong because the measurement literally is shown digitally on the device, on the actual hand grip dynamometer. So it's not, there's no room for human error or anything. Again, similarly to other tests, I retested as well. So this would mean that I could get an average from them and check that they were consistent and there were no abnormalities in the results. In terms of validity, as it's a direct measure of the amount of force he can exert, this test is very valid. It quite literally measures the amount of force shown in kilograms. It's also very suitable for him. He obviously needs strength to not only endure attempted tackles from opposition, but also perhaps if he was in a scrum to drive forward. And also maybe if you had opposition coming at you, attempting to tackle you, to actually have your arm and push them off. That's where you would need that kind of strength in your arm. But any form of strength is going to aid in rugby because it is very strongly based on strength and power. Those two components are perhaps two of the most important. In terms of practicality, Again, this test can be done anywhere, and I also had the dynamometers easily available, which made the test very practical, as I had all the equipment there readily available, didn't have to purchase anything else. The final test that I did was the 1 minute sit-up test. So again, this is very reliable as it has lots of evidence and lots of data to support it, meaning that I can reference back to it and look at averages for the client. It's very reliable and widely used by a lot of people. It's perhaps not the most valid, as it doesn't directly push them to the limit of how long they can endure repeated contractions. It's not how long they can go for, because it's a short amount of time, so it's not a kind of duration thing. It's kind of a test of how many they do in that short time. It's not a direct measure of how long they can go for. But the reason I chose this test was because I had a limited amount of time with my client. Bear in mind, I had to do the yo-yo test, which takes a lot of time. I had to repeat the Illinois agility test, repeat the 30-meter sprint. So in order to fit this in with the rest of the tests, I felt that the most valid and reliable test that I could do within this short space of time was the 1 minute sit-up test. The 1 minute sit-up test is suitable for my client because my client needs muscular endurance in his abdominals for the repetitive contractions that he undergoes when he's twisting and changing direction. So it kind of works in coordination with his agility. He kind of needs that core muscular endurance for those repetitive twists and turns, and for general posture and general running. Your core is always undergoing contractions, especially in rugby. Lastly then, it's again very practical, this test, as it requires very little equipment. I only used a mat and a timer. And again, it also requires very little space, because it only requires the space of that mat, really, and a little extra for you to be in there timing it. So overall, all of the tests are generally pretty reliable. Most of them have high validity, and those that don't, there are reasons for it. They are all very suitable to my client, and they are all very practical, as they can all be fitted into the sports hall and into the same area, so I can do them all one after the other, taking up less time as well. The last thing I will say is in terms of recommendations. So obviously I spoke about the exercise recommendations for the client, but there are also some lifestyle recommendations that I would perhaps suggest might help with the exercise recommendations in coordinates with it. So the lifestyle recommendations that I would suggest are actually nutritional changes. So obviously he wants more power, more muscular endurance, more strength. An increase in protein intake will actually help with that, because increase in protein increases protein synthesis, which will increase muscle mass, especially alongside training for power or strength, like the plyo box jumps, for example. I'd also obviously suggest decreasing the amount of fatty foods, as that's never going to help, and that will improve body composition that he needs for rugby, which is high mass, low fat. Also, before a game, perhaps he could carb load if he wanted to. That'd give him more energy for the game. But obviously the main focus here is those exercise recommendations.